before we go live in any trial for the day, there are a lot of other stories in the news that we want to talk to you about. Here's a special report right now.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Is this thing dangerous? A Texas SWAT team came across a heavily armed scarecrow while raiding a pot plantation in Richland, Navarro County. Police described it as a fully dressed figure lying in a hammock, appearing to be armed, holding an assault-type rifle, appearing to provide security for the location. The raid of a 5-acre plot netted some 10,000 pot plants, some of which were 6 feet tall. We don't know the height or weight of this suspect, but we suspect he had no trouble asserting his right to remain silent. Now to New Jersey, where body cam footage shows a commuter train barely missing a trespasser on the tracks.
Stop the train! Move! Move!
Officer Kyle Savoya is being hailed as a hero for saving the dazed man. Savoya was there for a welfare check. Dispatchers told him there'd be a man on the tracks, but he didn't realize a train was so close. It's unclear what was wrong with the man, but he did show up at the police station later on to thank the officer. And in Colorado, a 31-year-old woman is under arrest for stabbing her fiancé to death with a steak knife. One version of the story that defendant Jacqueline Souza gave to police is that her fiancé, Brandon Watkins, wanted to invite a strange guest to their wedding. It was a woman he had had an affair with years earlier. Police say Souza claimed the invite led her to suspect the affair was going on. Souza was apparently in the process of divorcing her own husband while planning an upcoming wedding to Watkins. She'll be in court for the first time on August 1st. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law & Crime.
Great reporting as always, Anthony. Top stories. You can go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories. But I have to talk a little bit about this fiancé situation. I've heard of things happening. This one's a little unique, so I want to bring on my very special guest, Law and Crime trial analyst, Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, good morning to you.
Boy, good morning to you, Jesse.
I gotta say, I don't see this ever happening before the wedding. Usually you see things happen when they're married for a while or after the wedding. Before the wedding. Now, this is strange. She's been charged with second-degree murder, not first-degree murder. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because there's a little bit of a crime of passion element going on here. It sounds like she was upset and perhaps jealous. Not a scenario where you find your fiancé, you know, in a compromising position with another woman, but something set her off and made her very jealous, and she decided that it was time for him to walk into a steak knife. At least that's one of the stories she tried to float.
Let's talk about it. She gave at least two separate versions of events to what happened, and police were not buying it.
No, because, listen, in a crime like this, when you stab somebody, it's a crime that leaves a lot of clues. And among the clues was the fact that she had basically an imprint, a bruise of the butt of a knife in her palm, which would indicate that she is the one who plunged the knife into her fiancé's chest.
Didn't she first say that he might have stabbed himself as a result of the argument? Then she said that he attacked her and that she pushed him then, and then he fell backwards on the knife.
Fell on the knife, and I think all of that is bunk, and not for nothing, but whoa, she's in the middle of a divorce, she's engaged to somebody else, and you know, I've heard of runaway brides, but this is a little ridiculous if you want to get out of your nuptials. Not a good look for her. Not a good look.
No, it's pretty awful. It's a tragic case. But my question is, have you in your experience ever seen a defendant, a suspect who's changed their story to investigators multiple times and get off? Like, once this jury hears that a defendant has changed their story multiple times, does the jury just say, you know what, that's it? Well,
your credibility pretty much goes out the window, right? Because you know the question that's going to be asked on if you go to trial is, were you lying then or are you lying now? And what the jury takes away from that is, you're lying. So, you know, usually it detracts from the ability to get an acquittal. She'll probably try to plea bargain this case, but I don't know. I don't know what kind of defense. Obviously, like I said, crime of passion could mitigate it a little bit, maybe to a voluntary manslaughter. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe we'll cover it here on Law and Crime if we get the opportunity, but we'll update you about that case if we have any news about it. So again, go to lawandcrime.com for the top trending stories of the day. Now I want to switch gears and talk about that Kirkland case, which I mentioned, the convicted serial killer who's getting a second chance at a sentencing hearing. What will that that jury, this new jury who's never heard any of the details of this case before 2 days ago, they're now hearing all the details of it, and they have to ultimately determine whether or not he'll be sentenced to life in prison or the death penalty. Yesterday, we saw the taped deposition of Lisa Kenny. This is from back in the day, I think 2009. She did not appear back in court now, but this was her taped deposition. She is the mother of 13-year-old Esme Kenny, who was brutally killed. Her body was burned. She was a lovely girl by all accounts. I don't know if we have a picture of her. If we do, I'd like to put it up. But she's really a beautiful young girl that was taken at the prime of her life. But maybe we'll show you a picture of her after this. But I want to play you the testimony right now of Lisa Kenny, and she will describe to you the details of what happened. Take a look. That is the mother of Esme Kenny explaining when she found out her daughter was missing. And again, I want to make a correction. That was a tape deposition that occurred about a month ago, not in 2009. And I want to talk to Jonna Spilbor about that. This case is strange in that this is a resentencing, not a retrial, but we're learning such details about how this all unfolded. I mean, to go into her mind is pretty tough.
Well, this case is strange for a number of reasons, but this man's already serving a life sentence, right? So, you know, now that this sentencing jury has to grapple with whether it's time to move on to the only other thing that they could do to him, which is sentence him to death, because the man's murdered, what was our last count? 5 people? 6 people?
5 people, yeah.
So, yeah, but the jury needs to know the details leading up to the actual deaths, and that's why this testimony is important. There'll be more to come, obviously, because you have to convince a jury to sentence him to death and not just let him languish in prison for the rest of his life.
I get your point, but that same comment is what got the prosecutor in trouble.
Know.
He said, if you don't find death, it's just freebies for him. That was not a good thing to say. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the other Kirkland murders. Stay tuned. Pretty unbelievable stuff to hear this testimony from a mother who lost her daughter, and you're listening to the moments when she realized what was happening. Now, I want to bring back on Jonna Spilbor to talk about this timeline because it doesn't make sense to me, okay? So Kirkland was arrested for the 1987 killing of Leonna Douglas. Almost faced 25 years in prison, but only served 16.
Okay.
Released in 2003, okay?
Right.
He, listen to this, killed 4 more times.
Right.
He killed 3 years later, he killed Cassania Cherie Crawford, who was 14 years old. Then 1 month later, he killed Mary Jo Newton, who was 45 years old. Then he kills Kimya Rollison, who was 25 years old. And then back in March of 8th, 2009, he killed 13-year-old Esme Kenny. How is it possible that this guy was released from prison only after 16 years and then was able to kill 4 more times?
So I can almost understand, you know, listen, when you get sentenced to what we call a determinate sentence, meaning, you know, a period of time, a fixed period of time, you serve usually most of it, 85% of it's a violent crime. And so he did that and he got out. What's unclear to me is he must not have been picked up for 2 of these 4 murders until he actually was charged with the murders of these 2 young women, I think. And then maybe at that point he confessed, and then they were able to put the pieces together and connect him to it. I don't know, because otherwise this man is committing heinous crimes, getting out of prison, which doesn't make sense, and then just keep killing more people. That's what it would look like. But I have a feeling that he wasn't picked up again until these 2 young girls. Until he was charged with the murder for these 2 young girls. Well,
we know that he may not show any remorse. We're waiting for the live feed in the courtroom. In his last case, he provided an unsworn statement to the jury where he basically said, look, I'm a monster, I'm evil. I'm asking you, and he says, I'm asking you to spare my life even though I don't deserve it. He understands what he did. He understands it. But I want to play for you right now Sergeant Jennifer Mitch. She's from the Cincinnati Police Department. She's one of the people who investigated the disappearance of Esme Kenny and the murder of Esme Kenny. Let's play that for you right now, and perhaps Jonna and I can have a better understanding about how this all unfolded. Take a look. We're learning about the investigation into the disappearance and murder of Esme Kenny, but why are we here? We're here because this is a resentence, because in the first trial, the prosecutor made an inappropriate comment. I want to ask Jonna Spilbor about that. Do you think that this guy deserved a resentence? The inappropriate comment was that they would just be freebies. If you don't find that this guy should be found guilty, should be found for the death penalty, it's just freebies because he's already going to be sentenced to life in prison.
I don't agree with the Ohio court's ruling on that, because what was the problem? Was the problem with it that the prosecutor used the word freebies and that he was trying to appeal to the passion of the jury, or was it that the jury wasn't supposed to know that he was already serving a life sentence? I don't agree with that. The jury is free to assess whatever. It's not evidence. Whatever the prosecution said isn't evidence. Jury's free to assess that. Whether it's a freebie or not, I don't think should have changed the landscape of that sentencing hearing.
Well, I'll tell you, Prosecutor Joe Dieters is probably regretting it either which way because he has to do this all over again. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Getting into the mind of a serial killer is no easy thing, and that's what we're hearing right now. Again, I'm here with Jonna Spilbor. Jonna, the likelihood that this jury will recommend a death sentence for this guy. I know we're still in the middle of it. We still have to see what the defense is going to present, and we'll talk about that in a minute because they're going to present evidence that this guy might suffer from a mental disease or defect. But the likelihood that after hearing what happened to these girls, that they would find death penalty.
You know, I think I almost would reframe that question instead of saying, you know, will they sentence him to death? Why shouldn't they, bless you, sentence him to death? I mean, here you have a guy who is basically, by all accounts, non-redeemable, right? I mean, he's already, the one time, he went to prison for 16 years, he gets out, and he just goes on a killing spree, for starters. Number two, let's ratchet this back a notch. In real life, when you have somebody who commits crime and is convicted, and let's say that person gets sentenced to probation, right? Probation is there to sort of make sure that you stay on the straight and narrow, don't violate, etc. If you continually violate your probation and you commit another crime, guess what's going to happen to you? Probation is going to say, we can't do anything with you. Now you're going to prison. This is like that, except at a higher level. There's no point in sparing his life. There's no point in letting him languish in prison. He's killed 5 or 6 people. It's time for him to get the sentence he deserves, which is execution. You
know, you say he's non-redeemable, and what's interesting is during his last trial, he provided an unsworn statement to the jurors where he says, I couldn't stop the rage and the anger. I could not make the bad Anthony go away. I could not tell the police why I did it because I don't know why. They say I'm evil, a monster, and you know what? They're right. It's curious to see whether or not he will present the same kind of statement to the jurors this time around. But we'll just have to wait and see. But what we do know is that when we do have that live feed today, we're going to hear more of his police interview. So stay tuned. We're covering a lot here on Law and Crime. So that was Cassania Crawford's grandmother talking about this case. And we saw earlier Esme Kenny's mother talking about this case. And we have seen constantly here on Law and Crime family members talking about the deceased children, and it is a difficult subject. You might be surprised, though, how composed they are during these depositions and during these being on the stand. I want to talk more about that with Jonna Spilbor. It's impossible to know what's going on in their minds and the pain that they have gone through.
Right.
But the composed nature of it is, would you say it's a surprise for you?
Not so much a surprise, because there is such a great gap of time between the occurrence of these horrific events and now. What I think is almost a little bit unfair for the jury is, you know, they have to assess everything. They're assessing the nature of the crimes, et cetera, as well as, you know, other components that go into whether they should sentence to life or not. And what they're not getting is the raw emotion from the people who were closest to these 2 young victims, because there's been a decade or almost, or a little bit less, in between the crimes and now. And that's almost, I don't want the jury to get the wrong idea that, like, these children weren't loved or there was, you know, it wasn't an emotional time, because it actually was. And even though they shouldn't vote on their emotions, it is important to see the emotion that happened to the families.
But couldn't you say it's not even necessary when you hear the details of these horrible crimes, that it's not even necessary whether or not they need that extra layer of emotion?
You know, what is going to be necessary? I mean, some of these jurors could be weeping. We've seen that happen when you hear horrific crimes.
Well, I will tell you, some of them got visibly uncomfortable and emotional when Esme Kenny's mother was giving that deposition. I want to talk real quick about his potential defense here. We heard a flavor of it that he might introduce evidence of him having a mental disease or defect, and how can somebody who committed these crimes, you know, do this? Is that of any weight?
Yes. In fact, that's probably the only thing that would hold water in this case and give the jury pause before, checking the box for execution, because it really wasn't a defense in the underlying guilt phase, I guess, and if it was, it didn't work. But the Supreme Court of the United States has said we cannot execute the mentally ill, basically. So if he can prove to the jury that he's so defective mentally that he falls into that category, then they shouldn't be sentencing him to death.
You heard the officer who investigated this said he's above average intelligence.
Right.
But so, you have this dichotomy. What is true evil and what is somebody suffering from a mental disease or defect? And I know we only have about 30 seconds left. So, I mean, how do you separate that?
It is such a fine line, and it would require expert testimony to where do you come, what side of that line does this guy fall on? And I think the testimony thus far is that he's not so mentally ill. He's just a psychopath.
Anthony Kirkland said himself in the last trial, they say that I am evil and a monster. And they are right. I mean, that's a pretty big thing. Maybe he'll say the same thing in this case. We'll have to see. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. That is the emotional testimony of the father of Kimya Rollinson. That was Gary Rollinson. I want to talk to Jonna Spilbor about this. So, the MO of the defendant, how did he, in your opinion, target these 5 women? We know that there's a common link. He burned their bodies. There was evidence of rape, brutality. But what was he looking for in these victims?
This guy seems to be such a psychopath and so broken as a human being. I think really first on his list was simply opportunity, right? He seized on an opportunity. Every victim was a woman, obviously, so there was a sexual component to it. You got 2 children here who obviously are no match for a grown man, physically speaking, right? So opportunity with respect to coming across them in the open and the fact that they could not really fight back. This one, in the case of the youngest victim, I just read that he got mad at her because she bumped into him when she was out for her jog, and that infuriated him, so he decided to rape, kill, torture, and then, after she was dead, set the lower half of her body on fire. Like, there is nothing redeeming this man. He's not mentally insane to the point where he should be found not guilty, because he knew what he was doing was wrong. He knows the difference between wrong and right. In his confession, he said, I'm a monster. He knows what he was doing was wrong. There is the fine line difference. He's not a redeemable guy. He is wired wrong.
It'll be interesting which way the defense goes when they are handled the case, and if he will provide an unsworn statement. We believe that he will to the jury, but we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, as we wait for the live feed in that courtroom, we have a lot of other stories to talk about. There's a lot of trending stories in the news. We have a special report about that right now. You are listening to Anthony Kirkland telling police about how he was found right near the Esme Kennedy murder scene, where he had knives in his pocket and was sleeping on a tree. I want to bring back in Jonna Spilbor. I don't mean to laugh, but this is kind of inexcusable. How does he even claim to be defending himself to officers?
No, I think this is actually gold for investigators. It's gold for the jury in this case. I mean, it's rare that he's basically a defendant admitting to a great deal of stuff. So there's no argument to be made here. And, investigators, when they get a defendant talking, they're going to keep you talking till you run out of words. And I think that was a strategy here, so we're going to be on this for a little while today.
Well, that's exactly my point. He has a lot to say. We're going to take a break, but we're going to be playing this for a while. This is a live feed into the Anthony Kirkland case, and it just keeps on coming, the statements that he makes, the statements that he makes. And the jury is hearing every word of it. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. There's a lot more. Okay, so Anthony Kirkland first denied being involved in the Esme Kennedy disappearance or murder. Jonna, is that what you're getting from this too? He first denied it outright, saying he didn't see her running around in that area.
Yeah, this line is getting let out slowly, but that's quite common, right? It's not every day that a cop is going to be investigating a crime, talking to a suspect, and he just blurts out that he's the one who did it and here's how I did it.
What do you think of his demeanor in this interview?
It's very strange. He's very kind of like just cold, sort of matter of fact, like almost like he's trying to help out the officer. The officer's like, I'm not trying to trick you. It's, he doesn't sound like a deranged murderer yet.
But what he said, the officer, which was interesting, and I hope everybody caught it, he goes, you look like you're taking a long time to think about your answers, and you're thinking real hard. Just, I don't want you to do that. Just tell me what's going on. Was anybody else up there? And this is the beginning part about it, where there's a lot more of this interview tape. This is the defendant's own words. How often do you get this? So, when we come back, we're going straight into that courtroom. We do not want you to miss anything in the Anthony Kirkland case out of Ohio. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about the Anthony Kirkland case. We're going to go live in a minute, and we're going to continue to listen to the defendant's interrogation tape, and he is something to listen to. I'm not going to shed any tears for him in this because he is giving up a lot. We'll talk more about it in a second, but before we do, I have to say goodbye to Jonna Spilbor.
And that is a reason to shed some tears.
That is.
Yes.
Nice touch.
But I will see you Monday. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
Of course. Pleasure. Have a great weekend, Jonna.
Thanks,
Thank you again. All right, we're going live back into that courtroom. And the good thing about this deposition, this interrogation, is they're actually tracking the words as he says it, so it's easy to follow. Let's go live.